And welcome into this week's edition of The Locker Room. Got a special show today. We're spending all 30 minutes talking about the reclassification of the Alabama High School Athletic Association in high school sports. And no better person to talk about with us than John Holder. Thanks so much for joining us today, John.
Chase, I was just talking about before we came on the air here, this is one of the great days every 2 years for a high school football fan is reclassification. You find out teams that are moving up and down in classification. You find out teams that are changing regions, teams kind of coming into new regions, moving out of old regions. It's a pretty exciting day for high school football and basketball. This is all sports, so it's an exciting day for high school sports fans all across Alabama today.
And we'll get to all those changes for the local teams here throughout the show today. But let's start talking about some specific teams. Let's start with the Anniston Bulldogs. They moved down to 4A.
Yeah, a couple of years back up in 5A, now moving down to Class 4A. And I really think this is going to be a great move for the Anniston Bulldogs. A couple of things you see in that region, we'll talk about this a little bit later on, is they're moving into a region where they're going to have a lot more neighborhood teams to play. You know, in 5A the last couple of years, they really only had Alexandria and Lincoln. And they had the long road trips to Mortimer, Jordan, and Hayden, and Moody, and St. Clair County, and folks like that. So I think the big takeaway for Anniston is, in addition to having some great competition, it's local guys, local teams that the fans really know and the players really know. You're talking about folks like Anniston and Jacksonville and Cherokee County and folks like that that'll be in their region. So I think overall, I think Anniston's got to be pleased not only moving down from 5A to 4A, but playing more local teams in the region.
And another one of those teams, the Cleveland County Tigers, they've been in 4A and they've made the way up to 5A now.
Coach Michael Short probably not as happy as Eddie Bullock is, because not only are they moving up to Class 5A, Chase, for the first time ever in school history, they've never played in 5A, but they have some longer road trips coming up. It's not the neighborhood games that they had in 4A. In the old 4A region, you know, they were in there with Sacs and Jacksonville and Cherokee County and folks like that. Now they're moving into a region where they'll have some local teams like Lincoln, Central Clay County, Talladega, folks like that, but then they've got some lengthy road trips. You're talking about folks like Valley that are moving down from 6A, Beauregard, you're sitting there with Sylacauga. I mean, this is going to be not only a challenging region as far as play goes, stepping up from 4A to 5A, but they're losing some of their what we would call money games, where there are big gates and some of the local flavor in their region as well.
Well, we were able to speak with Coach Michael Short today about these changes, and here he is.
What we're going to have to do is just get in the weight room and get bigger and stronger to deal with 5A linemen. A lot of those guys that we're going to be playing are at the upper echelon of 5A as far as numbers are concerned, so they'll probably have more people. So we're going to have to figure out a way to combat that problem of them having more people, more linemen. But, you know, we're Cleveland County. We'll do what we have to do to be competitive, and we'll work at it. We're going to be 5A South in the football. And as far as our spring sports and winter sports, they're going to be 5A, but they're going to be in the north, so they're not going to be in the south. So that should help some as far as travel is concerned.
Well, there's two of the main storylines from today involving local teams. What are some other changes you liked about today, and maybe some matchups we're going to see from now on with these changes?
Well, I think, you know, you look down in the lower classifications, 1A really no changes at all with our local 1A areas. 2A, not many changes going on there. Then you start looking at 3A. Again, not a whole lot of changes. The changes really happen in 4A, 5A, 6A, and some of those were good, some of those are bad. I think the team that came out smelling the best, so to speak, in this deal was the Oxford Yellow Jackets. Oxford not only being in a very competitive South in 6A in football, one, they stayed in Class 6A because there was some rumor that they might expand the 7A classification, and Oxford might have been caught up in that. They stayed with the same numbers in 7A, which means Oxford stayed in 6A, and plus they moved from South Alabama to North Alabama. They lose playing folks like Benjamin Russell and Opelika and folks like that in Valley, not only long road trips, but also playing against some very tough football teams. Now they're in the North, better competitive-wise, better travel-wise, and they'll be facing folks like Southside, who they played the last couple of years in non-region play. They keep Pell City, Albertville, Coleman, AP Brewer, folks like that. I don't think there's anybody in Oxford complaining about the draw that they got for the next 2 years in football.
Well, you know, Coach Short mentioned this in his soundbite. They're south in football, but they're north in other sports. How does all this work for the High School Athletic Association.
It's not as big. It's not as big of a deal, I don't think, in basketball as it is in football, because in football you really have a North champion and a South champion, where in basketball you're really looking at regional play and things like that. It may change where you're going as far as regions go, as far as your regional tournament. Instead of playing at Jacksonville State, you might be playing in Montgomery or something like that. But for the most part, basically they start in South Alabama when they do this, and they go with the numbers that are selected they're given to them by the State Board of Education, and they look at the 10 through 12 grades and 9th grade holdbacks, and basically they start plugging them in. They go geographically. They've got this fancy program that's been developed by the folks, I think, at Alabama A&M University up in Huntsville, and they plug it in geographically, and they just take the numbers and they plug in. Starting in South Alabama, they start with the largest schools and filter down to the smallest schools, and they plug it in geographically. It's a long process, but it's a very fair and even process. It's done really by computers for the most part now, a computer program as far as the geography goes. And then the numbers, the Athletic Association doesn't really have the numbers. These are the numbers from the State Board of Education, so it's a very fair process. That's how it happens. They do it every 2 years, and that's where we are today.
All right, well, we're going to grab our first time out of the show. When we come back, we will look at some specific regions that had some changes here in this reclassification, and we'll do that coming up next in the locker room. And we're back here in the locker room. John Holder, Chase Robinson here. We're talking reclassification for the Alabama High School Athletic Association. High school sports came out this week. So let's take a look at some specific football regions now involving our local teams that has some changes. And we'll start in Class 7A. Here's Class 7A Region 4. There you see Bob Jones, Buckhorn, Gadsden City, Grissom, Hewitt-Trussville, Huntsville, James Clemens, and Sparkman, John.
Not a lot of changes in this region. As a matter of fact, only one change, and that is Hazel Green. And that's, of course, former coach at Munford, Will Wagnon. His team moved down from 7A to 6A. They were replaced in this region by Hewitt-Trussville. So that helped Gadsden City out a little bit as far as travel goes, a school that's maybe 40, 50 miles down the road instead of another Huntsville school. But basically that region staying the same, and that's a really good region. Bob Jones, ranked number 1 for most of last year. James Clemens, one of the top programs in the state. You get no break with Hewitt-Trussville coming in there, and the Gadsden City Titans, of course. So there's a lot of good football there in Class 7A Region 4.
All right, and next one here is 6A Region 7. There you see Albertville, Brewer, Coleman, Fort Payne, the Oxford Yellow Jackets, Pell City, and Southside.
Big changes here. This is the same region technically that Southside was in. The big change is they're going to lose a couple of teams out of that, most notably Scottsboro and Fort Payne move from 6A down to 5A, and they get replaced. I don't think that was a good trade because they get replaced with Oxford and Pell City. For Oxford and Pell City, they're happy. They're away from Benjamin Russell. They're away from Opelika. They're away from those long road trips down south. They'll have some longer road trips up north, but I think you'll trade Opelika and Benjamin Russell for Brewer and Albertville just about any day. I think that's a really good draw for Oxford, for Pell City, for Southside. Not a lot of big changes there. Really the only new team that Southside will be picking up in region play there is Pell City because Southside and Oxford have played the last couple of years in non-region play.
And next up we have 5A Region 4 with Beauregard, Central Clay County, Cleburne County, Lincoln, Sylacauga, Talladega, and Valley.
You look at Cleburne County going back, they move up from 4A, Valley moving down from 6A. So there's a pretty big spread between the size of those two schools. And then you start looking at Central of Clay County. I think Central of Clay really likes this. They're getting some of the teams that they've played the last couple of years, like Beauregard and Sylacauga and Talladega. But the thing I think the folks down in Clay County like is the fact that they're finally getting to play some local teams in some region games. In addition to keeping Sylacauga and Talladega, they also pick up Cleburne County and Lincoln. And I really think that that's going to be a phenomenal matchup. Been kind of waiting to see that ever since Central of Clay County was formed, to see Central of Clay County and Cleburne County finally play each other. That'll be, to me, for our part of the state of Alabama, I think that's the premier matchup as far as local interest in that region.
And next up here is 5A Region 7 with the Alexandria Valley Cubs, Arab, Boaz, Crossville, Douglas, Etowah, Gunnersville, and Scottsboro.
Well, it's a total change for Alexandria Valley Cub fans. There's not one team from their region last year that's in their new region. They're in a totally new region. All 7 region teams are going to be totally different. No more Lincoln, Mortimer, Jordans, Hayden, St. Clair Counties, Moody's, or Anniston even anymore. They're going to Sand Mountain. They're playing 4 schools from Marshall County. They'll have Arab, they'll have Boaz, they'll have Douglas, and they'll have Gunnersville. They also pick up Etowah, which a couple of years ago they played them in non-region play. Also, you'll pick up in there the Crossville Lions out of DeKalb County, and also Scottsboro, who has a very good team coming up. I would say that that's a pretty good deal for Alexandria, cutting down on the maybe the competitiveness a little
Right.
bit. That seems to be a big gap between the top and the bottom of that region. You start looking at Gunnersville, obviously very good. Etowah, very good. Scottsboro, very good. But then you get down toward the end, and Arab didn't have a very good season last year. Neither did Boaz. Douglas and Crossville have struggled. So I think there's a bigger gap from the competitive standpoint between the top and bottom of that region.
Next up, let's move on down to 4A. Here's 4A Region 5, the Anniston Bulldogs, Asheville, Cherokee County, Hoax Bluff, Jacksonville Golden Eagles, Aniana, the Sacs Wildcats, and the White Plains Wildcats.
Well, you look at this region right here, and Asheville, of course, moving up, and then you had Aniana staying 4A but moving over from Blount County into this region. The Anniston Bulldogs moving down to 5A to 4A. I think that's the big news there. But look at this, folks. If you are a longtime observer, resident, whatever, of Calhoun County, the thing that jumps out to me, and I don't know if I've ever seen anything more striking to me in my lifetime of watching high school football than the fact that Anniston and White Plains are going to play each other in high school football and in the same region. No more than about 20 years ago, Anniston was playing at the highest levels of this state in 6A, 94, won a 6A state championship when there were only 6 classes. White Plains was down a 1A school. Most of my life growing up, White Plains was a 1A school, a very small 1A school. It was inconceivable, Chase, until not just a few years ago, that Anniston and White Plains could ever play in high school football. And this fall, for the first time ever, it's going to happen. That, to me, is huge.
Next up is 4A Region 3 with Childersburg, Dadeville, Elmore County, Handley, Holtville, Leeds, Mumford, and Tallahassee.
You got to really feel for Munford here. Munford so desperately wants to be up here playing the folks like Sacs and Anniston and Jacksonville and folks that they know, the local area. Instead, they're going to be down again. This has happened many years to them. They're going to go a long way to play against teams that they're really not that familiar with. You got one county team in there in Talladega County in Childersburg, but then you got Dadeville, Elmore County, Handley, Holtville, Tallahassee moved down from 5A to 4A. Two-time defending 4A state champion Leeds still in that region. So not only tough, good football teams, but a lot of long road trips there. Tough for Munford, but they can handle it. They've been in this situation before, and I think that'll be a very competitive region. Obviously, when you take a look at Tallahassee, Munford, Leeds, Handley, Dadeville, there's a lot of great football programs there.
With that being said, Munford made it to the semifinals last year. With this competition, will they be able to do that again?
I think they will. Talking with Coach Bill Smith at our Pigskin Roundup All-Star Banquet, he feels good about his team this year. He thinks they're going to be very competitive once again in 4A.
And now let's move down to 3A with 3A Region 5. That's Glencoe, Ohatchee, Piedmont, Pleasant Valley Raiders, Randolph County, Welborn, and Weaver.
As we mentioned, not a lot of changes once we get in 3A on down. That's why we spent most of our time here talking about the larger classes, because that's where we had the big changes. Basically, in this region, now it goes from an 8-team region to a 7-team region. Asheville moved up. Westbrook Christian moved down. They moved Randolph County, who was in the 2A semis last year, and they're going to have a pretty good team again into this region. So that makes that region pretty tough from top to bottom, because virtually every one of those teams will be improved in that region. And, of course, the Piedmont Bulldogs, defending state champions, and they'll be loaded again in 2016.
Now let's move on down to 2A with 2A Region 6. That's Asbury, Collinsville, Fife, Gaston, Eider, Santa Rock section, and the Westbrook Christian Warriors.
2A Region 6 welcoming back in 2 teams that had moved up to 3A, Sandrock and Westbrook Christian. Both had been the last couple of years in 3A, moving back down to 2A. And look at that first team up there. Asbury, one of only 2 new schools playing high school football in the Athletic Association this year. They've had a basketball program for a lot of years, but the Asbury Rams there in Marshall County for the first time ever in 2016 will field a varsity football team, and what do you know? They get put into a region with the Fife Red Devils.
All right, let's move on down now to our last one, 1A Region 4 with Appalachian, Donahoe, Raglan, Talladega County Central, Victory Christian, Wadley, and Winterboro.
Well, Chase, as you know, in our 1A regions here in East Alabama, the two that we have with our local teams, no changes whatsoever. This is the exact same region as last year. The big change here is this region was in North Alabama. This was 1A Region 5 last year. The same teams, but it's 1A Region 4. That's huge because they'll be competing in South Alabama, which means the road to Auburn for them now goes through two-time defending state champion Maplesville.
That's right. And another quick question for you, John, back to the 3A with Piedmont and all them. Madison Academy moves up. Does this open the door for more local teams in 3A?
I think it probably does. That can't do anything but probably help your chances there. Clearly, Piedmont is as big a favorite as anybody to repeat and go back to the Super 7. I mean, I think the path in North Alabama for Piedmont, they're going to be the odds-on heavy favorite to go back and represent North Alabama in the Super 7.
All right, well, we're going to grab another timeout. When we come back, we'll talk more about the reclassification. We'll also take a look at some basketball areas as well, so stay with us right here in the locker room. Back here in the locker room talking all of the moves of the reclassification that happened in the Alabama High School Athletic Association. And, John, for most of these local teams, are these good changes?
I think they are. One, as we just talked about, there's not a lot of changes this year, just not a whole lot of big wholesale changes. I think for most teams across East Alabama, these are good changes. Not for everybody. I don't think we've ever had a year where we've had a reclassification where everybody came away 100% pleased. Probably the main two, as we talked about, that probably would have drawn it up differently if they could have, would have been Cleburne County and Munford.
And, you've been around high school football a long time. You know your high school football very well. What is your biggest takeaway from today?
Well, I think the fact that you've got Oxford moving into North Alabama into a much more favorable region, I think, competitive-wise. And then what I'm really excited about, and I think folks here in East Alabama, particularly in Calhoun County, particularly in Anniston, need to be excited because not only Anniston moving down to 4A, but now Anniston and Saxe are going to be in the same region. There's a rivalry, and they don't even play each other in football the last few years. But there, as you know, there's a big rivalry. These kids are so close to each other. Some of them live literally across the highway from each other. This is going to be I think immediately this may be the biggest rivalry in Calhoun County right off the bat, Anniston and Saxe. I
know you've mentioned you like the Oxford move, you like that one. But looking at the whole state, everything in it, what's your favorite move or change of the day?
You know, I haven't digested all of it yet. I like the fact, there's a lot of rumors going around, Chase, that they were going to expand to 36 teams or maybe 48 teams in 7A, which I'm glad they left that alone because that kind of defeated the whole purpose of having a 7A if you did that. So I like leaving the big schools up there. That was one of the big things I liked, that they didn't touch 7A. Let that flesh out for another couple of years and see what happens there. And I think a lot of folks are going to be happy about Madison Academy moving to 4A. Now, the folks that are in Madison Academy's region, folks like North Jackson and Madison County and DAR, and some of those folks are not going to be happy. But I think there's been a lot of clamoring in 3A. With the exception of Piedmont this year, the folks in 3A, I think they've had enough of Madison Academy. They're glad to see them go and move into another classification. But I'll tell you one thing about Madison Academy. All the respect in the world for their program. I don't think they'll miss a beat in Class 4A.
Right. All right. Well, for you high school basketball fans, the reclassification happened to all sports, including basketball. So let's take a look at some of the changes in basketball, and let's start with Class 1A, Area 10. That's Donahoe, Jacksonville Christian, the defending state runner-up in girls, Spring Garden, Faith Christian, and the defending state champion in boys, Sacred Heart.
Yeah, I know we're talking about next year, but Spring Garden's girls will have a lot coming back even next year. Certainly Sacred Heart again. We'll have a lot coming back and we'll be loaded again. Faith Christian been very competitive in boys basketball the last couple of years. JCA and Donahoe. I think that's going to be a really interesting region right there, especially that dynamic, though, of putting Spring Garden and whose program on boys is coming along, Spring Garden and Sacred Heart in the same region. That's two basketball schools, to be honest with you, in the same region.
And next up, 4A Area 8, that's Anniston, Hanley, Mumford, and Sachs.
And again, we go back to the Anniston-Sachs dynamic again. They've been in two different classifications for the last couple of years. Now back in the same classification. You know the pride in Anniston's program. You know how good Sachs' program has been in boys basketball the last couple of years. And then you look at the Anniston girls program and how good they are. And the Sachs girls program is starting to come along as well. So I really think that's going to, the rivalry that we talked about with Anniston and Sachs, that's going to carry over from football right into basketball.
Next up, 4A Area 12. Here's some more local teams. Cherokee County, who's had a great season so far. Hoax Bluff, Jacksonville, and White Plains.
Well, Jacksonville's always had good basketball. Hoax Bluff's always had good basketball. And just think about this region right here. You've got White Plains and Cherokee County. I would say two of the top, 4 or 5 programs, at least in North Alabama, if not in the state of Alabama, in this one region right here. The reality is, on the boys' side of things, you're probably going to have a very good basketball team, maybe 2 basketball teams that don't even make the playoffs in a region that is that good from top to bottom.
Good stuff there. And we thank you for joining us on this reclassification day and learning all about this. John, thank you very much for joining us. Couldn't think of anyone better to come on the show and talk about this. Thank you very
always
much.
Great to talk about high school athletics. And hey, listen, spring will be here, and we'll be talking high school football and these great matchups very, very soon.
All right. Thank you, folks, for joining us here on The Locker Room. We'll be back next week, so join us then.